A judge slaps a black girl in court, furious she dared to speak up. He thinks she's powerless and just another name on his docket. But within hours, the truth hits like a bomb. She's the daughter of the FBI director. Now the nation's watching, the walls are closing in, and the man in the robe has no idea what's coming. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The Cold Springs High School auditorium buzzed with tension as parents, students, and faculty packed the rows of worn burgundy seats. The late afternoon sun filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across faces both angry and anxious. At the front, behind a polished wooden table, sat the school board members, their expressions carefully neutral as they faced the crowd of over 200 people. The air felt thick with anticipation, like a storm about to break. Principal Anders sat rigidly in his chair, his thin lips pressed into a tight line. The recent expulsion of Amara Fields had ignited a firestorm that even his usual bureaucratic demeanor couldn't extinguish. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead despite the room's cool temperature. Beside him, board chairwoman Diane Lutz shuffled through papers, occasionally glancing at the restless audience with what seemed like concern in her eyes. Her fingers trembled slightly as she arranged her notes. "Next speaker," called out the timekeeper, her voice barely carrying over the murmur of the crowd. A few heads turned toward the back of the room, waiting. Jania Brooks rose from her seat, smoothing her simple blue blouse. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her steps were steady as she approached the microphone. The metal stand squeaked as she adjusted it to her height. A few whispers followed her path to the front, but she kept her eyes focused straight ahead. "My name is Jania Brooks," she began, her voice clear and strong despite her racing pulse. "I'm here to speak about my friend Amara Fields, and about rules that hurt some students more than others." The room grew quieter. Even the usual whispers and rustling of papers stilled. Dozens of eyes locked onto her face, some curious, others defensive. "Our dress code says hair must be neat and conventional," Jania continued, holding up the student handbook, its worn edges testament to how often she'd studied it. "But who decides what's conventional? Amara's natural hair is neat. It's professional, it's beautiful, and most importantly, it's part of who she is." She paused, meeting the eyes of board members one by one. The fluorescent lights overhead made their faces seem paler, more exposed. "When you expelled Amara for wearing her natural hair, you didn't just enforce a rule. You sent a message about who belongs here and who doesn't." Principal Anders shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Jania referenced specific incidents where white students with unusual hairstyles hadn't faced consequences. His collar seemed suddenly too tight as he tugged at it. Her words were measured but powerful, backed by facts and personal observations that she'd carefully documented over months. "This isn't just about hair," she said, her voice growing passionate but never losing its composure. "It's about dignity. It's about respect. It's about... She's got a gun." The male voice cut through the air like a knife. Chaos erupted instantly. Chairs scraped against the floor as people jumped up. Screams filled the air, bouncing off the walls and multiplying the panic. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them down or toward exits. Officer Miller, who had been stationed near the door, immediately drew his weapon and rushed forward, his heavy footsteps pounding against the floor. "Hands up! Don't move!" he shouted, advancing on Jania, his weapon pointed directly at her chest. "I don't have anything," Jania said calmly, raising her hands high, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This isn't..." Before she could finish, Officer Miller grabbed her arm, spinning her around and forcing her to the ground. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs as her cheek pressed against the cold linoleum floor. The taste of dust filled her mouth. "She didn't do anything," someone yelled from the crowd. A woman's voice, desperate and angry. "That's my student," a teacher called out, pushing against the tide of fleeing people. "She doesn't have a weapon." But Officer Miller was already snapping handcuffs around Jania's wrists, the metal biting into her skin. She didn't resist, even as rough hands pulled her to her feet. Her eyes met Chairwoman Lutz's, who looked troubled but remained silent. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. As they led her through the chaos of the auditorium, Jania caught glimpses of shocked faces, phones recording the scene, and classmates calling out in protest. Some cried openly while others stood frozen in disbelief. The late afternoon sun hit her face as they pushed through the double doors, leading her toward the waiting police cruiser, its lights flashing blue and red against the brick school building. Officer Miller opened the back door. "Watch your head," he said gruffly, guiding her inside with a firm hand on her shoulder. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, sealing her in the cage-like back seat. Through the window she could see students spilling out of the building, some crying, others arguing with the remaining officers. Parents hugged their children close, faces etched with fear and confusion. The cruiser's engine rumbled to life. As they pulled away from the school, Jania watched the crowd grow smaller in the side mirror, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. The handcuffs dug into her wrists, but she sat tall, knowing that somehow this moment would not be the end of her story. The fluorescent light buzzed incessantly overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls of the juvenile detention cell. Jania sat on the hard metal bench, her shoulders hunched against the cold. The gray facility sweatshirt they'd given her was too big, making her feel even smaller in the oppressive space. Her wrists throbbed where the handcuffs had dug into her skin hours earlier, leaving angry red marks that pulsed with each heartbeat. Across the corridor, in another cell, a girl with matted dark hair sat facing the wall, completely silent. Jania had tried catching her eye earlier, hoping for some human connection, but the girl remained turned away, lost in her own world of troubles that Jania could only guess at. "Excuse me," Jania called out as Deputy Sandra Holt passed by, her boots clicking against the concrete floor like a metronome counting down the minutes of her freedom. "Please, I need to call my father. He doesn't know where I am." The guard barely slowed her pace. "Phones are locked until morning, that's policy." Her voice was flat, uninterested, as if Jania's concerns were just another item on a tedious checklist. "But he'll be worried sick," Jania protested, her voice cracking with emotion. "He needs to know I'm okay." Deputy Holt continued walking, keys jingling at her hip like a mocking reminder of who held power here. Should have thought about that before causing trouble. Alone again in the dimness, Jania's fingers found her mother's bracelet, the familiar smooth metal cool against her skin. The simple silver chain had been her mother's favorite piece of jewelry, given to Jania on her 10th birthday, just months before Sharon Brooks passed away. It was her talisman, her connection to everything good and safe in her world. The memory washed over her with startling clarity, her mother's gentle hands fastening the bracelet around her wrist, the scent of her lavender lotion, her warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Remember, baby," Sharon had said, "whatever life throws at you, face it with grace under fire. That's how we survive. That's how we win." Tears slid silently down Jania's cheeks as she remembered her mother helping her get ready for school each morning, carefully braiding her hair while humming gospel songs that seemed to vibrate with generations of strength. Sharon Brooks had been elegance personified, a civil rights organizer who taught her daughter to stand tall, speak truth, and never let fear win. But now, in this cold cell, fear crept in anyway. The isolation pressed against her chest like a physical weight, making each breath a deliberate effort. An untouched dinner tray sat by the door, some unidentifiable beige meat and overcooked vegetables that she couldn't bring herself to touch, the smell alone turning her stomach. "Hey," Jania whispered toward the girl in the other cell, trying one more time. "I'm Jania." The silence stretched on, broken only by that endless fluorescent buzz that seemed to drill into her skull. Hours crawled by like wounded animals. Every time Jania closed her eyes, they snapped open again at the smallest sound, the distant slam of a door, the squeak of Deputy Holt's shoes during her rounds, the occasional muffled voice from somewhere in the building that reminded her she wasn't entirely alone in the world. She lay down on the thin mattress, still wearing her clothes from the school board meeting, her mother's bracelet pressed against her racing pulse. The concrete walls seemed to close in with each passing hour, stealing more of her breath. Through the narrow window high above, she could see a sliver of night sky, but no stars were visible through the security mesh, as if even that small comfort had been deliberately taken away. Jania curled onto her side, making herself as small as possible on the narrow cot. Her body was exhausted, muscles aching from tension, but her mind raced with questions. Was her father going crazy with worry? Had anyone from school tried to reach him? Would they believe her side of the story? The fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting strange shadows that danced across the floor, while the silence of the detention center pressed in around her like a suffocating blanket, heavy with loneliness and uncertainty. The harsh knock on the cell bars jolted Jania from her fitful daze. She hadn't truly slept, just drifted in and out of consciousness through the long night, her mind racing between disbelief and fear. "Time for court," Deputy Wade barked, his keys jingling as he unlocked her cell. "Get changed. 5 minutes." His voice held no warmth, just routine efficiency. He tossed her wrinkled clothes from yesterday through the bars, the same modest blouse and jeans she'd worn to the school board meeting. The fabric smelled faintly of the previous day's events. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her she hadn't eaten since lunch yesterday, but no breakfast appeared. Not even water. Jania's hands trembled slightly as she changed, her muscles stiff from the hard bench that had served as her bed. The familiar fabric of her own clothes provided little comfort, but at least they weren't the humiliating jumpsuits she'd seen other inmates wearing. Her mother's bracelet caught the fluorescent light as she smoothed her blouse. At least they'd let her keep that. She ran her fingers over the smooth beads, drawing strength from the connection to her mom. Deputy Wade returned, his face impassive as he cuffed her before leading her through the stark hallways. His grip wasn't cruel, but it wasn't gentle either. Outside, a white transport van waited in the morning chill. 3 teenage boys already sat inside, their orange jumpsuits bright against the vehicle's gray interior. Jania kept her eyes fixed on the floor as she was guided to a seat, feeling their curious stares burning into her. The van rumbled through morning traffic, each bump sending a jolt through her tired body. Through the mesh-covered windows, Jania caught glimpses of normal life continuing. People walking dogs, heading to work, sipping coffee, living their regular Tuesday morning routines. It felt surreal, like watching a movie about a world she no longer belonged to. At the courthouse, whispers followed their small procession through security. 2 officers near the metal detector exchanged meaningful looks as she passed, not bothering to lower their voices. "That's the FBI guy's kid, right?" one muttered, eyebrows raised. "Brooks's daughter," the other confirmed quietly, giving her a second glance. Jania's confusion deepened, adding another layer to her anxiety. How did they know her father? Why did it matter? Her dad rarely talked about his work at home. She was led to a small consultation room where her court-appointed defender, Peter Klein, waited. His rumpled suit and dark-circled eyes spoke of too many cases and too little sleep. Papers spilled from his worn briefcase as he pulled out her file, some sliding across the table. "Okay, let's make this quick," he said, barely looking at her as he flipped through pages. His coffee cup left rings on her paperwork. The smell of stale coffee hung in the air. "When the judge asks questions, keep your answers short and simple. Don't try to sound too smart, it won't help." "But sir, I didn't do anything wrong," Jania started, leaning forward earnestly. "At the school board meeting." Klein cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Listen, the facts don't matter as much as how you present yourself. Just be quiet and respectful. Let me handle it." He glanced at his watch, clearly counting the minutes until his next case. Jania sat back, stunned. This was the person supposed to defend her? He hadn't even asked for her side of the story or shown the slightest interest in what actually happened. A bailiff appeared at the door, an older black woman whose stern expression softened slightly when she saw Jania. "They're ready," she announced, her voice professional, but not unkind. As Jania was led toward the courtroom, whispers from the gathered spectators and reporters reached her ears, rising and falling like waves. "That's Elijah Brooks's daughter? The FBI agent's kid? Isn't he the one who broke up that militia group last year?" None of it made sense. Her father worked important cases, she knew that much. But why did everyone here seem to know about him? Why were they watching her so closely? She felt like a specimen under glass. The heavy courtroom doors swung open with a creak. Jania's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat as she was led inside, the wood-paneled walls seeming to close in around her. The room smelled of polish and tension. As the door clicked shut behind her with finality, she raised her eyes to the bench, trying to steady her breathing. There sat Judge Thomas Harrow, adjusting his black robes with practiced movements. He looked up, and their eyes met for the first time. Something in his gaze made her blood run cold. The courtroom's silence feels heavy as Jania stands before Judge Thomas Harrow. Her heart pounds, but she keeps her shoulders straight, just as her mother taught her. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Judge Harrow's face as he studies her file, his lips curled in what looks more like contempt than consideration. The cold air of the courtroom prickles her skin, but she refuses to shiver. Honor student, huh? His voice carries a mocking edge that makes Jania's stomach tighten. She can feel everyone's eyes on her, the bailiff, the spectators, even her own lawyer who hasn't said more than 10 words to her since they met 30 minutes before the hearing. Yes, Your Honor, Jania responds clearly, her voice steady despite her nerves. I maintain a 4.0 GPA and participate in several school clubs, including debate and community outreach. Harrow's eyes narrow, the skin around them crinkling with disapproval. And you think that gives you the right to cause disruptions at school board meetings? That your grades somehow put you above the rules? No, Your Honor. I was exercising my right to peaceful protest. There was no disruption until someone falsely claimed. Her words come measured and respectful, despite the trembling in her fingertips. I didn't ask for your opinion on the matter. Harrow cuts her off sharply. His knuckles whiten around the edge of his desk, veins protruding beneath aging skin. Jania takes a careful breath, counting to 3 silently as she steadies herself. I apologize, Your Honor. I'm simply trying to explain what happened. What happened? Harrow's voice rises, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Is that you deliberately incited chaos at a public meeting. You undermined authority and encouraged others to do the same. Sir, with respect, I was speaking calmly about school policies that disproportionately affect minority students when… There's that defiance again. Harrow interrupts, standing up behind his bench. His face has reddened, blotches of anger spreading across his cheeks. You just can't help yourself, can you? This attitude is exactly the problem. The room grows tenser with each exchange. Jania's public defender, Mr. Klein, stares at his shoes, saying nothing, his briefcase clutched tightly in sweaty hands. She feels completely alone in a room full of people. I'm not being defiant, Your Honor. I'm trying to tell the truth about what occurred. Her voice remains level, though her heart hammers against her ribs. Something snaps in Harrow's expression. Before anyone can react, he steps down from the bench, crosses to Jania, and strikes her across the face with an open palm. The crack of the slap echoes through the stunned courtroom like a gunshot. Jania's head snaps to the side, her cheek instantly burning with fiery pain. She tastes blood where her teeth cut into her inner cheek. For a moment, she can't breathe, can't think. Her mother's bracelet feels cold against her wrist, the familiar weight anchoring her to reality. Gasps and murmurs ripple through the gallery. Someone whispers, "Oh my God," loudly enough to be heard. Bailiff Morgan takes a half-step forward, then stops, clearly torn between duty and disbelief. Mr. Klein remains frozen, his face pale as paper, mouth slightly open. Jania slowly turns her head back to face forward. She doesn't raise a hand to her swelling cheek. She doesn't cry. She simply stands there, looking straight ahead, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Grace under fire. Harrow's chest heaves as he glares at her. His hand is still raised, trembling slightly. When she doesn't cower or break down, his face twists with something that looks like fury mixed with fear, as if her composure threatens him more than any outburst could. He storms back to the bench, snatches up his gavel, and slams it down so hard the sound makes everyone jump. "Court adjourned," he barks, spittle flying from his lips. The bailiff finally moves, gently taking Jania's arm to escort her out. As they walk toward the holding room, the whispers behind them grow louder, and through the windows, she catches glimpses of people already on their phones, fingers flying across screens, the news of what just happened spreading like wildfire. Judge Thomas Harrow leans back in his leather chair, savoring the rich aroma of his afternoon coffee. His chambers reflect his status: dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and carefully curated photographs showing him with influential figures. The afternoon sun streams through tall windows, casting warm light on his collection of awards and commendations. A gavel, polished to a high shine, rests prominently on his desk, a symbol of the power he wields daily. Sometimes these kids need to learn respect the hard way, he chuckles to himself, adjusting his bow tie in a small mirror. The morning's events play in his mind like a satisfying movie scene. He'd shown that uppity teenager exactly where she stood in his courtroom. The girl's shocked expression replays in his mind, bringing a smirk to his lips. These moments of control were what he lived for. His assistant, Heather March, appears in the doorway. Her usual composed demeanor is notably absent, replaced by an unsettling pallor. She clutches her phone tightly, knuckles white against the case. Her normally perfect posture is slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. "Sir," she says, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something you need to know." She glances nervously at the door before stepping closer. "The girl you struck today, Janiah Brooks, she's Elijah Brooks's daughter." Harrow laughs, taking another sip of coffee. "Brooks? That name's as common as dirt around here." He waves his hand dismissively, already mentally moving on to his afternoon docket. "No, sir," Heather interrupts, something she's never done in 7 years of working for him. "Elijah Brooks, the FBI director, the one who took down the Richardson conspiracy last year, the one who's been on 60 Minutes 3 times, the man they call the conscience of law enforcement." The coffee cup freezes halfway to Harrow's mouth. A drop spills onto his pristine shirt as his hand begins to shake. "That's impossible," he mutters, but the certainty in his voice is gone. A cold sensation spreads through his chest, replacing his earlier satisfaction. Heather holds out her phone. The video is already trending on social media. Crystal clear footage showing him striking the teenage girl. The timestamp shows it was posted less than 30 minutes ago. The comments section is exploding with outrage. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments pouring in by the second. His own phone buzzes. Then again, and again. Local reporters asking for comment. National outlets picking up the story. His email inbox starts filling up faster than he can process. The constant notifications sound like warning bells in his ears. Harrow's carefully maintained composure crumbles. He paces the length of his chambers, tugging at his bow tie, which suddenly feels too tight. The photographs on his wall seem to mock him now. All those powerful connections, all that carefully cultivated influence. Faces of politicians and community leaders who would be scrambling to distance themselves from him by dinner. "Get me Brooks's number," he barks at Heather. There has to be a way to handle this quietly. His mind races through possibilities, favors he could call in, connections he could leverage. "Sir," Heather says, her voice trembling, "there are already protesters gathering outside. Channel 7 has a van in the parking lot, and the State Bar Association just sent an email about emergency ethics proceedings." Harrow rushes to his window. Sure enough, a small but growing crowd is forming on the courthouse steps. Some hold hastily made signs. Others point their phones up at his window, recording. A chant begins to rise from the crowd, indistinct but unmistakably angry. With shaking hands, he pulls the blinds closed and collapses into his chair. His computer screen shows the video clip, now playing on a major news website. In the footage, his face is contorted with rage as his hand strikes Janiah's cheek. The sound of the slap seems to echo in his ears. He can't look away as the clip loops again and again, each viewing making his stomach sink further. His phone buzzes once more, this time with a text from the state's Chief Justice. Harrow doesn't need to read it to know what it says. 20 years on the bench, hundreds of cases, countless decisions, and in one moment of unchecked anger, he's watching it all crumble. The empire he'd built on fear and intimidation was proving to have a foundation of sand. The afternoon sun beats down on the courthouse steps as camera crews jostle for position. News vans line the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. The crowd has swelled to hundreds, their signs bobbing above heads. Justice for Janiah. and judges aren't above the law. The air buzzes with tension and righteous anger, voices rising and falling in waves of chants that echo against the stone facade. Inside his chambers, Judge Thomas Harrow paces, his polished shoes wearing a path in the expensive carpet. Every few minutes, his phone buzzes with another call he won't answer. CNN, MSNB, Fox News, local stations. The sound makes him flinch each time, a tiny betrayal of the composure he's struggling to maintain. Sweat beads at his temples despite the cool air conditioning. "Sir," Heather March says from the doorway, her tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. "The video has over 2 million views now. Every major network is running it." She swallows hard, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "They're calling it Southern Justice. Twitter is, it's not good, sir. The hashtag is trending nationwide." Harrow's hand trembles as he reaches for his coffee cup. "Let them talk. This will blow over." His voice lacks the conviction his words attempt to convey. "Sir, I really think we should issue a statement. Something conciliatory." "Absolutely not." The cup slams down, coffee sloshing onto papers, staining them brown. "The moment we apologize, we admit wrongdoing. I will not be crucified by the court of public opinion." His face flushes red, the veins in his neck standing out. Outside, the chants grow louder, a rhythmic pulse against the building's walls. Harrow moves to the window, peering through the blinds with fingers that part the slats just enough. Police in riot gear form a line between protesters and the building entrance, their shields gleaming in the sunlight. News cameras swing toward any movement at the doors, hungry for the next development in the unfolding drama. Across town, a black SUV with tinted windows winds through back streets, avoiding main roads and potential followers. Jania sits in the back, flanked by 2 federal agents in dark suits, their expressions professionally neutral. Her cheek still throbs where Harrow struck her, a dull, persistent ache that matches her heartbeat. The female agent, Torres, offers her a bottle of water, but Jania shakes her head, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the window. They stop for gas at a small station on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that still has analog pumps and faded advertisements in the windows. Through the window, Jania catches a glimpse of herself on the store's mounted TV. The footage plays in slow motion, her steady stance, Harrow's sudden movement, the impact that knocked her sideways. She turns away, her mother's bracelet cool against her wrist, a small comfort in a world suddenly turned upside down. "We'll be there soon," Agent Torres says softly as they pull back onto the road, her voice gentle but not pitying. The safe house is a modest ranch-style home in an unremarkable neighborhood of similar houses with neatly trimmed lawns. Inside, the walls are bare white, the furniture generic, a place designed to be forgotten. Jania sits on the edge of a gray couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her fingers absently tracing the pattern on her mother's bracelet. Hours tick by in silence, marked only by the steady rhythm of the wall clock. When the knock comes, it's gentle but firm, a familiar cadence. Jania opens the door slowly, her heart pounding. There stands Elijah Brooks, his powerful frame filling the doorway, shoulders squared despite his evident exhaustion. His usual crisp suit is slightly rumpled from the flight, his eyes tired but intense, taking in every detail of his daughter's face. For a moment, father and daughter just look at each other, 5 years of distance hanging between them like a heavy curtain neither knows how to part. The sounds of the day fade away, the reporters' questions, the protesters' chants, Harrow's angry denials. In this quiet moment, there is only a father seeing his daughter's bruised face, the mark of violence he couldn't prevent, and a daughter seeing her father's barely contained rage and guilt, the emotions he rarely allowed the world to witness. The safe house living room felt like a museum after hours, still, sterile, and unnaturally quiet. Jania sat on the edge of a stiff beige couch, her mother's bracelet catching the dim light as she twisted it around her wrist. Across from her, Elijah Brooks cut an imposing figure even in his rumpled suit, his broad shoulders tight with tension. The wall clock ticked away seconds that felt like hours. "Baby girl," he said softly, stepping forward to embrace her. Jania's body went rigid at his touch. The nickname felt foreign now, like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. They hadn't seen each other in months, and now here they were, reunited under fluorescent lights and armed guards who stood silently in the hallway. They settled into seats across from each other, the coffee table between them like a demilitarized zone. The silence stretched thin and brittle. A car passed outside, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through the heavy curtains. "How are you feeling?" Elijah finally asked, his deep voice gentle but formal, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Jania stared at the bland carpet, her fingers still working at her bracelet, twisting it faster now. The question hung in the air until she lifted her eyes to meet his. "You weren't there," she said quietly. Each word weighted with disappointment. Pain flickered across Elijah's face before his features settled back into their usual mask of calm control. His tie hung loose around his neck, a rare sign of dishevelment. "The president himself asked me to step back from this investigation. We have to handle this carefully." "Handle this?" Jania's voice cracked slightly. "Is that what we're doing?" "There are procedures that need to be followed," Elijah continued, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "We'll pursue justice, but we have to do it the right way. The media attention." "The media attention?" Jania stood up suddenly, her hands clenched at her sides, trembling slightly. "A judge hit me in open court. He hit me, Dad. And instead of being here, you were taking calls about optics and procedures. Jania, please understand, this situation requires patience," she cut in, her voice rising. "Public perception management? I know all the terms, Dad. I've heard them my whole life." Her voice grew quiet but intense, like a knife's edge. "He hit me, and the world is still asking if I deserved it." Elijah's jaw worked silently as he watched his daughter's face, so like her mother's, especially now, fierce with righteous anger. He saw the slight swelling on her cheek where Harrow's hand had landed, now turning a subtle shade of purple. Something primal and protective rose in his chest, warring with years of trained restraint. "I know you're hurt," he started carefully, his fingers digging into his palms. "But we have to be strategic about—" "Strategic?" Jania's laugh was hollow, echoing in the sterile room. "Of course we do." She turned away, heading for the guest bedroom, her shoulders straight despite their burden. "I'm tired. I think I need to lie down." The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than a slam. Elijah remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from him, the cushion still holding the impression of where his daughter had sat. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another call from Washington, no doubt. Another crisis meeting about containment and consequences. In the bedroom, Jania perched on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, its stiff mattress creaking under her weight, her phone glowing in the darkness. She pulled up the video that was now everywhere, her own face frozen in shock as Harrow's hand connected with her cheek. She pressed pause, studying the moment like a stranger might, the courtroom lights harsh and unforgiving in the frame. Through the wall, she could hear her father's measured tones as he took another call. The words were muffled, but she could guess their shape. Protocol, procedure, proper channels. Always the voice of reason, even when reason had nothing to do with it. A siren wailed in the distance, its cry matching her internal turmoil. She touched her cheek gently, the ache a dull reminder. The safe house walls seemed to press in around her, painted an institutional shade of beige, and she had never felt more alone. The bracelet on her wrist, her last connection to her mother, felt heavier than ever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the FBI regional office's marble steps as news vans jostled for position along the crowded street. Handmade signs bobbed up and down in the sea of protesters, "Justice for Jania," and "Suspend Harrow now." The chants echoed off nearby buildings, creating a constant drumbeat of anger and demands for accountability. The crowd had grown since yesterday, with community organizers handing out water bottles and coordinating shifts to maintain their presence around the clock. Inside the climate-controlled building, Jania Brooks stood in the hallway, her fingertips pressed against the cool glass. Through a crack in the conference room door, She could see her father, Elijah, seated at the head of a long table. His face was a mask of professional calm, but she noticed how his jaw clenched slightly, a tell she'd learned to recognize over years of watching him from a distance. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his sleepless night. "The optics are concerning," a silver-haired attorney in an expensive suit said, spreading papers across the table. "Director Brooks, your position requires absolute neutrality. This incident creates an unavoidable appearance of conflict." Another advisor, a woman with sharp features and sharper glasses, nodded in agreement. "There's already talk on the Hill. Some are suggesting you should step down temporarily to preserve the integrity of any investigation." She tapped her pen against a folder marked confidential with practiced precision. Jania's stomach twisted. Step down? Because of her? She watched her father's face, searching for any crack in his professional facade. But Elijah Brooks remained stoic, his hands folded carefully on the table, knuckles white with tension. "The political implications are significant," a third voice added. "We need to consider how this affects pending cases, especially the corruption task force. The media is already connecting dots between your daughter's incident and your ongoing investigations." Jania backed away from the door, her chest tight. All they cared about was politics and optics, not the burning in her cheek where Harrow had struck her, not the humiliation that still made her hands shake when she thought about it. She was just another problem to manage, another crisis to contain, a liability to her father's career. Hours later, in their temporary safe house, a nondescript suburban home with security cameras disguised as porch lights, Jania pushed food around her plate, while Elijah attempted to bridge the growing chasm between them. The takeout containers from their favorite restaurant sat mostly untouched between them. "I heard what they said," she said quietly, not looking up, "about you stepping down." "It's just procedure, Jania. Standard considerations in a complex situation." Elijah's fork hovered over his own untouched meal. "Complex?" Her fork clattered against the plate. "He hit me in front of everyone. What's complex about that?" "We have to handle this the right way," Elijah said, his voice steady but strained. "There are protocols." "Protocols?" Jania stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "A judge assaulted your daughter and you're worried about protocols?" "I'm trying to protect you." "No," Jania cut him off, her voice rising. "You're protecting the system. The same system that let him do this to me. The same system you always choose over everything else. Over Mom. Over me." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Elijah flinched as if she'd struck him. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Jania laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Was it fair when you missed my middle school graduation because of a case? When you sent Agent Wilson to my piano recital instead of coming yourself? When you—" Her voice broke and she reached out to steady herself against the table, her mother's bracelet sliding down her wrist. Elijah stood and moved toward her, arms outstretched. But Jania stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. The movement was instinctive, protective. Her father froze, his hands dropping to his sides, defeat etched in the slump of his shoulders. They stood there, father and daughter, separated by more than just the physical space between them. The silence stretched out, heavy with years of missed moments and unspoken words. Later that night, in her temporary bedroom with its generic hotel-like furnishings, Jania pulled out her journal. She started to write, trying to make sense of everything, but the words felt hollow. She tore out the page, crumpled it, and threw it in the trash. The sound of the paper hitting the empty bin echoed in the quiet room. Outside her door, Elijah stood with his hand raised, ready to knock. But after a long moment, he lowered it and walked away, his footsteps fading down the hallway. In the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of water, staring at his reflection in the darkened window, wondering when exactly he'd lost the ability to comfort his own child. The television screen flickered with the polished backdrop of American Truth with Grace Willoughby. Judge Thomas Harrow sat perfectly composed, his silver hair neatly combed, his navy suit crisp and spotless. The studio lights caught his American flag pin, making it gleam as he adjusted his posture. His hands rested comfortably in his lap, the picture of judicial confidence. Tonight we address what some are calling a crisis in our justice system, Grace began, her voice carrying its signature mix of concern and indignation. But others see it as nothing more than a political witch hunt against a respected judge. Her perfectly made-up face wore an expression of practiced concern as the camera zoomed in. Harrow's lips curved into a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Thank you for having me, Grace. It's important that someone tells the real story here." His voice carried the weight of authority, smooth as polished marble. In the safe house living room, Jania sat rigid on the couch, her eyes fixed on the screen, fingers digging into the worn fabric cushions. Elijah stood behind her, his hands gripping the back of a chair until his knuckles whitened. The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. "The video being circulated," Harrow continued smoothly, gesturing with one manicured hand, "shows only a fraction of what happened. That young lady repeatedly challenged courtroom authority. She displayed what I would call a calculated defiance." The way he said young lady dripped with condescension. Grace nodded sympathetically, her blonde hair bouncing perfectly. "And this is becoming more common in our courtrooms, isn't it? This lack of respect for authority?" "Exactly right." Harrow leaned forward, his voice taking on a paternal tone that felt like sandpaper against Jania's ears. "I may have overreacted in the moment, and for that, I acknowledge some fault. But we live in a world where even the most basic discipline is labeled as violence, where authority figures are demonized for maintaining order." He sighed heavily, as if carrying the burden of society's decline on his shoulders. Jania's phone buzzed in her lap. A direct message from an anonymous account popped up. Her breath caught as she read, "We know where you live. Better watch your back, little girl." The message included her safe house address. Ice spread through her veins as the words burned into her vision. "Turn it off," Elijah urged, reaching for the remote, his jaw clenched tight with anger. Jania pulled away, clutching the remote to her chest. "Number, I need to hear what he's saying about me." Her voice was quiet but determined. On screen, Grace was building to one of her trademark monologues, her eyes gleaming with righteous fervor. "So what we're really seeing is an attack on our entire justice system, isn't it? Using this one incident to undermine—" "Dad," Jania's voice cracked as she held up her phone. Elijah snatched it immediately, his face darkening like a thundercloud as he read the threat. He pulled out his own phone, barking orders to his security team, his entire body shifting into protection mode. "Lock down the perimeter. I want a trace on this account now. Full cyber team activated." His voice was controlled but tight with anger, the vein in his temple visibly pulsing. Meanwhile, Harrow's interview continued in the background, his words floating through the room like poison. "What concerns me most," he said with false gravity, adjusting his tie, "is how quickly people rush to judgment. How eager they are to destroy a man's career over one moment of—" Jania stood abruptly and walked to her room, her legs shaking beneath her. She locked the door behind her and slid down against it, finally allowing the tears to fall, hot and silent down her cheeks. Her phone lay on her bed where she dropped it, Harrow's frozen face still visible on the screen, smug, unrepentant, and now somehow even more threatening than when he'd struck her. Through the door, she could hear her father coordinating with security teams, his voice a mix of professional command and parental fear. But even that couldn't drown out Grace Willoughby's final words floating from the TV, a perfect example of how the radical left weaponizes isolated incidents. The words hung in the air like a mockery of everything Jania had endured. The morning sun filtered through the bulletproof windows of the safe house, but Jania barely noticed. Her phone buzzed constantly, each notification making her flinch. She scrolled through hundreds of messages, her finger hovering over each one like touching a hot stove. She got what she deserved. The words glowed on her screen, making her stomach turn. She clicked on the profile, a blank avatar, no real name, just another faceless voice telling her she deserved violence. Another message popped up, should have shown respect. And another, attention-seeking brat. Each one cut deeper than the last. Outside, the street had transformed into a battlefield of signs and shouting. One group waved "Justice for Jania" posters, while others held up back the badge, and support Judge Harrow signs. Police officers formed a human barrier between the groups, their faces tight with tension. The whir of news helicopters and drones created a constant buzz overhead, like angry mechanical wasps. Occasionally, chants would swell into a roar that penetrated even the reinforced walls. Janiyah pulled the curtains shut but couldn't block out the noise. Her phone pinged again, this time an email from Cold Springs High School. Due to ongoing security concerns, all classes are suspended until further notice. She checked her messages. The group chat where she and her friends usually shared memes and homework help was dead silent. No one had texted since the incident. Not even a, "Are you okay?" The emptiness of her inbox felt like another slap. She picked up her journal, a gift from her mother years ago, its cover worn from daily use, and tried to write. The words came out messy and angry. "Why did he? How could they? I just wanted..." She scratched out each attempt until the page was nothing but black scribbles. The paper tore under her pen. Tiny scraps fluttered to the floor like broken pieces of her thoughts. Around dinner time, Elijah knocked softly before entering with a plate. Steam rose from perfectly grilled chicken and bright green vegetables. He'd clearly tried to make it look appealing, but the sight of food made her queasy. She noticed the careful arrangement, his attempt at normalcy through a home-cooked meal. "You need to eat something," he said, his deep voice gentle but firm. His eyes, usually sharp and focused, now held a softness that made her want to cry. Janiyah turned away from him, curling deeper into her chair. "I'm tired," she mumbled. The words felt heavy in her mouth, like stones she could barely push out. "Janiyah, please. I said I'm tired." Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion she fought to contain. Elijah stood there for a long moment, the plate still extended. Finally, he set it down on her desk and left, closing the door with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than if he'd slammed it. His footsteps faded down the hallway, measured and controlled, just like everything else about him. As night fell, Janiyah lay in bed, her phone held above her face. The video played again, her standing straight-backed before the judge, answering clearly. Harrow's face twisting with rage, the sharp crack of his hand against her cheek. She kept rewinding, zooming in on Harrow's expression. What was that look in his eyes? Hatred? Fear? Something deeper? Something familiar that she couldn't quite name. The sounds from outside grew louder. No justice, no peace mixed with "back the blue." Car horns honked in support or anger. Flashlights and phone cameras created a dance of light on her ceiling, shadows moving like restless ghosts. She pressed play again. The slap echoed through her earbuds. Her cheek tingled with phantom pain, a burning sensation that wouldn't fade. In the video, she didn't cry, didn't scream. Just stood there, head turned to the side, frozen in shock. Everyone in the courtroom looked just as stunned, except Harrow. He looked satisfied, like he'd been waiting for this moment, this chance to put her in her place. Janiyah's thumb hovered over the replay button. Outside her window, America argued about whether she deserved that satisfaction. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the safe house's dining room, as Elijah Brooks spread two carefully worded press statements across the polished table. His fingers, usually so steady when handling important documents, trembled slightly as he adjusted the corners. The FBI media team's statement lay on the left, its official letterhead gleaming with an authority he'd once found comforting. The Department of Justice draft sat on the right, each word measured and precise, like ammunition in a battle he wasn't sure how to fight anymore. Janiyah remained curled on the couch, drowning in yesterday's oversized hoodie, her hands tucked into the worn sleeves. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from another sleepless night, making her look older than her 16 years. Her phone lay face down beside her, finally silent after she'd muted all notifications, though the occasional vibration still sent tremors through the cushions. "We need to get ahead of this," Elijah said, his voice carrying that familiar authoritative tone he used in briefing rooms, the one that had solved countless crises before. "A joint statement from both of us would show unity, strength. It's the smart play here." "No." Janiyah's voice was quiet but firm, like steel wrapped in silk. Elijah paused, his hand hovering over the papers, uncertainty flickering across his usually composed features. What do you mean, no? This is how we fix this. This is what I do. Fix what? Jania stood slowly, her shoulders straight despite her exhaustion, her mother's quiet dignity showing through. Fix the fact that a judge hit me? Or fix how it looks for your career? Which one matters more to you? That's not fair, Elijah protested. But his daughter wasn't finished, her words gaining momentum like a wave about to break. I'm not your campaign, she said, each word deliberate and sharp enough to draw blood. I'm not a press release or a photo op. I'm your daughter. Her voice cracked on the last word, revealing the pain beneath her composure. Elijah stepped toward her, frustration building in his chest like a storm. Everything I've done has been to protect you. Every case, every investigation. Protect me? Jania laughed, but there was no humor in it, only years of accumulated hurt. Where were you when I had nightmares after Mom died? When I won the debate championship? When I needed a father instead of a guardian? When I cried myself to sleep? I was serving my country. Elijah's voice rose, echoing off the walls of their temporary sanctuary. Making the world safer for you. Everything I've done has been for you. The world? Jania backed away as he approached, her mother's bracelet catching the light like a warning. You always talk about justice for everyone else. But where's justice for me, Dad? Where were you when that judge? She stopped, swallowing hard against the memory. Elijah reached for her, his face softening with belated understanding. Baby, I'm trying. Don't. She stepped back again, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. You always talk about justice, but never when it's mine. Never when I needed you to just be my father. Not an agent, not a hero. Just my dad. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words, thick with decades of missed moments and good intentions gone wrong. Elijah stood frozen, his carefully crafted statements forgotten on the table, suddenly meaningless. His daughter's words hit harder than any criticism he'd faced in his career, because this time, the judgment came from the one person he'd tried hardest to protect. That night, Jania lay in her bed, the ceiling fan spinning lazy circles above her, its soft whirring a poor lullaby. The photo on her nightstand showed her mother's radiant smile as she held baby Jania, both of them caught in a moment of pure joy. Her fingers traced the edge of the frame, but she couldn't bring herself to pick it up. The memory felt too heavy tonight, weighted with all the years that had passed and all the words left unsaid between father and daughter. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the safe house windows as Jania scrolled mindlessly through her phone. Her thumb froze mid-swipe. There it was, Rachel Monroe's face, perfectly posed in her Twitter profile picture, next to words that made Jania's stomach turn. People need to stop pretending this girl's some hero. I was in that room. She escalated it. The tweet had exploded. Thousands of retweets, comments flooding in by the second. Below it played a video clip from a local news interview, Rachel's familiar voice now strange and cold. Jania has always liked attention. She went into that courtroom looking for drama. Jania's hands trembled as she watched her former best friend, the girl who used to braid her hair during sleepovers, tear her character apart on national television. Rachel sat perfectly poised in a pink cardigan, her straight blonde hair falling just so, as she described how Jania had been disrespectful and confrontational with Judge Harrow. The girl who once promised they'd be friends forever now spoke about her like she was a stranger, worse, like she was an enemy. The comments section was worse. Classmates she'd known since elementary school were sharing the post, adding laughing emojis and cruel jokes. Someone had dug up an old photo of her and Rachel together at a school dance, crossing out Jania's face with a red X. The image burned into her mind, a visual representation of how quickly she'd been erased. Always knew there was something off about her, wrote Katie Chen, who'd borrowed Jania's notes just last week, who'd smiled and thanked her profusely. Typical attention seeker, added Marcus Williams, who'd asked her to help him with math throughout freshman year, who'd high-fived her when she helped him pass his midterm. "This is what happens when you don't know your place," another comment read, this one from an anonymous account with an American flag avatar. The words blurred as tears filled Jania's eyes. Her chest felt tight like someone was sitting on it. The phone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered against the far wall, making a sharp crack sound that matched something breaking inside her. The screen spiderwebbed with tiny fractures, just like the trust she'd placed in people she thought she knew. She grabbed her pillow, pressed it against her face, and screamed. All the fear, betrayal, and rage she'd been holding back since the courtroom came pouring out in one raw, primal sound. She screamed until her throat hurt, until spots danced behind her eyes, until her lungs burned for air. In the hallway, Elijah Brooks paused mid-stride at the sound of his daughter's anguish. His hand lifted automatically toward the door handle, parental instinct urging him to rush in and comfort his child. But he hesitated, remembering how she'd flinched away from his touch earlier. The weight of their broken connection pressed down on his shoulders as he lowered his hand and took a step back. Then another. He walked away from her door, his footsteps heavy with unspoken words, his heart aching with the knowledge that he didn't know how to reach her anymore. Inside the room, Jania's screams dissolved into deep, racking sobs. She slid from the bed onto the floor, clutching the pillow to her chest as if it could hold her together. Her mother's bracelet lay beside her where it had fallen, the delicate silver chain broken, just like everything else. The tiny charm, a gift from her mother on her 8th birthday, glinted in the fading sunlight, a painful reminder of another loss. She curled into herself on the carpet, making herself as small as possible, the way she'd wanted to in that courtroom. The pillow muffled her crying, but couldn't muffle the truth. She was alone. Her classmates, her best friend, even her own father. Everyone had chosen their side, and it wasn't hers. In the span of a few days, her whole world had collapsed, leaving her adrift in a storm of other people's judgments. The morning light filtered weakly through the safe house windows as Jania picked at her cold toast. Across the table, Elijah sat perfectly straight, his FBI badge glinting on his belt, a reminder of the wall between them. Neither spoke. The TV droned in the background, another talking head dissecting her life like a lab specimen. The 15-year-old displayed vocabulary and composure unusually sophisticated for her age, the anchor said, her tone suggesting suspicion rather than praise. Sources close to the situation question whether... Elijah grabbed the remote and clicked off the TV. The silence felt heavier now, like a physical weight pressing down on both of them. Jania's fork scraped against her plate, the sound sharp and jarring in the stillness. She hadn't taken a real bite in days. Food had become just another obligation, something to push around until it looked like she'd made an effort. Her father watched her, concern etched in his features, but he remained quiet. Always so quiet when it mattered most, when words might have bridged the gap between them. A firm knock at the door made them both jump. Elijah's hand instinctively moved toward his hip as he stood, his body tensing with the reflexes of a career lawman. Through the peephole, he recognized Agent Marcus Chen, one of the Bureau's top liaisons, his familiar face a small relief. "Director Brooks," Chen said formally as he entered, nodding to Jania with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We need to discuss the Harrow investigation." Jania's spine stiffened at the judge's name. She stayed at the table listening, her fingers curling tightly around her fork. "The Bureau is launching a formal investigation into Judge Harrow's conduct," Chen explained, his voice careful and measured, as if walking through a minefield. "Given your personal connection to the case, we'll need your official recusal." Elijah nodded without hesitation. "Of course, I'll sign whatever's needed." "Dad!" Jania's voice cracked through the room like glass breaking. Both men turned to look at her. "So that's it? You're just stepping away?" "It's protocol, Jania," Elijah said, his tone gentle but firm, the voice he used for press conferences in difficult situations. "We have to do this by the book." "The book," she repeated, the words bitter in her mouth like medicine. "Always the book." Outside, voices grew louder. a rising tide of opinion. A new wave of protesters had arrived. Jania moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Signs bobbed in the morning air like colorful buoys. Some read "Justice for Janiyah," while others declared "Stop the race card" and "Back the badge." Complete strangers fighting over her truth. Her phone buzzed. Another direct message from an anonymous account. "We know where you sleep." She deleted it without showing her father. What was the point? He'd just tell her to trust the process, to let the system work. But the system had already worked exactly as it was designed to, leaving her voice muffled and her pain dismissed like it wasn't even real. Agent Chen left with signed papers in hand. Elijah tried to catch Janiyah's eye, but she was already heading to her room, shoulders squared against whatever comfort he might offer. "Nia," he called after her, using her childhood nickname for the first time in years. "We have to be smart about this." She paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. Smart like following protocol? Or smart like staying quiet while a man hits your daughter? The door closed behind her with a soft click, a gentler sound than the slam she felt inside. Sitting at her desk, she pulled out her journal, the one thing that still felt truly hers. Her hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "He says it's protocol. I call it silence." The amber glow of bourbon caught the firelight as Judge Thomas Harrow sat in his leather armchair, the crystal tumbler trembling slightly in his grip. The TV played silently, showing footage of protests outside the courthouse. His own face appeared on screen. That moment, that slap, played over and over again, his features contorted with rage. He reached for the remote and turned it off with a forceful click. The darkness felt familiar, almost comforting, like an old blanket he could hide beneath. He pulled an old photo album from the bottom drawer of his desk, its leather binding cracked with age and worn smooth at the corners. Inside, protected by yellowing plastic sheets that crinkled under his touch, was a photograph that made his throat tighten. His father, Sheriff Ray Harrow, standing tall in his crisp uniform, badge gleaming in the Alabama sun, eyes hard as flint. The memory hit him like a physical force, transporting him back to a sweltering summer evening in 1983. He could smell the honeysuckle that grew wild along their front porch, feel the rough wooden boards under his bare feet, hear the cicadas droning their endless summer song. 10-year-old Thomas sat on the steps, knees pulled to his chest, watching his father pace back and forth, boots striking the wood with authoritative thuds that seemed to shake the whole house. "Boy needs to learn," Sheriff Ray was saying, his voice thick with anger, tobacco-stained teeth flashing as he spoke. "These people, they don't understand anything but force. Never have. Never will." He was talking about the Johnson boy from down the road, who'd allegedly stolen fruit from old Mrs. Mason's garden, just a few peaches that had fallen to the ground. Young Thomas watched as his father broke a thin branch from the peach tree, stripping it of leaves with practiced efficiency, calloused fingers working methodically. "Come here, son," Ray commanded, holding out the switch. "Time you learned how the world really works, a man's got to maintain order." Thomas's hands shook as he took the branch. It felt wrong in his grip, too heavy with meaning, too light in weight. "But Daddy, maybe he didn't. Maybe it wasn't him," he whispered, eyes fixed on the ground. The back of Ray's hand caught him across the mouth, not hard enough to leave a mark, but enough to silence, enough to sting both skin and pride. "Don't you question me, boy. You want to be a man? Then you better learn who's in charge. Weakness gets you nowhere in this world." They walked down the dirt road, Thomas trailing behind his father like a shadow, the switch clutched in his sweaty palm. The Johnson family's small house came into view, paint peeling from its wooden siding, and Thomas's stomach churned with acid dread. Willie Johnson, just a year older than Thomas, stood in the yard, frozen like a deer in headlights as Sheriff Ray approached, the evening sun casting long shadows ahead of them. "Your boy needs teaching," Ray announced to Willie's mother, who stood helplessly on her porch, dish towel twisted between her work-worn hands. "And my boy's gonna help do it. That's how he learns to be a man." Thomas felt the switch in his hand, saw Willie's wide, terrified eyes. Something inside him screamed to run, to refuse, to fight back. But his father's shadow loomed large, and the weight of expectation pressed down like a physical force, crushing his small rebellion before it could form. "Do it," Ray commanded. "Show them who's boss." The first strike was weak, hesitant, barely touching Willie's arm. "Harder!" Ray barked, his voice like thunder. The second strike drew a whimper that Thomas would never forget. By the third, Thomas had closed his eyes, trying to shut out Willie's quiet sobs and his own shame that burned hotter than the summer air. That night, Thomas sat alone in his dark bedroom, the switch hidden under his bed like a guilty secret, a serpent waiting to poison his dreams. He could still hear his father's words of approval. "That's how you keep order. That's how you make them respect the law. Remember that, son." Back in the present, Judge Harrow drained his glass, the bourbon burning less than the memory that had never faded. The photo of his father stared back at him, proud and stern in his uniform. Harrow touched his own face, feeling the deep lines of age and authority that now matched his father's, wondering when exactly he had become the man in the photograph. "She looked me in the eye," he whispered to the empty room, remembering Jania's steady gaze. Just like Willie Johnson had, all those years ago. The same defiance, the same quiet dignity that had made his father so angry, that now made something inside him crack like thin ice. He switched off the lamp, letting darkness fill the room. In the shadows, past and present blurred together, the switch in his young hand, the slap in the courtroom, his father's approving nod, the gasps of shock from the gallery, all of it echoing in the dark, a chorus of ghosts that wouldn't let him rest. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the safe house's back porch, as Jania sat cross-legged, torn journal pages scattered around her like fallen leaves. Her fingers traced the ragged edges where she'd ripped out entry after entry, each one failing to capture the storm inside her. The screen of her phone lit up with another notification, this one different from the flood of hate and threats she'd grown numb to over the past week. "I believe you. Say the word and I'll bring the mic." The message was from Layla Santiago, a young journalist she'd met during career day. Jania remembered how Layla had spoken passionately about giving voice to untold stories, how her dark eyes had sparked with determination when she talked about truth-telling in a world of noise. Her heart pounding against her ribs, Jania glanced through the window where two FBI agents stood guard, their faces serious as they scanned the perimeter. She typed back quickly, fingers trembling slightly. "Downtown cafe, 4 p.m. Getting out wasn't easy. She waited until the shift change, watching the clock tick by with painful slowness, then slipping through the back gate while the agents were switching positions. The hoodie felt heavy in the Georgia heat, sweat beading along her hairline, but she pulled it lower over her face, sunglasses hiding her eyes from curious glances. The cafe was quiet, just a few afternoon regulars nursing cold drinks in the air-conditioned refuge. Layla sat in a corner booth. No camera crew, no fancy equipment, just her phone and a small recorder. She stood when Jania approached but didn't hug her or make a scene. Just a simple nod of recognition, understanding the need for discretion. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to," Layla said softly as Jania slid into the booth. "This is your story, your truth, your pace." Jania's fingers wrapped around a glass of water, condensation cooling her skin. She watched people pass by outside, living their normal lives, untouched by the chaos that had swallowed hers whole. "They're telling my story without me," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to take it back. I need to." Layla nodded, placing her phone on the table. "Whenever you're ready. No rush." The red recording light blinked on. Jania took off her sunglasses, looking directly into the lens. No script, no rehearsal, just truth, flowing from a place deep inside her. "My name is Jania Brooks," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Last week, I stood up in a courtroom to defend my friend's rights. I was respectful, I was peaceful, and a judge struck me across the face for it." She paused, touching her cheek where the bruise had finally faded to a yellowish shadow. "Everyone's been speaking for me. News anchors, politicians, social media. They call me a troublemaker or a victim, but I'm neither. I'm a 15-year-old girl who believed in justice and learned the hard way that some people are still afraid of the truth. Her eyes never wavered from the camera. I'm not the first, but I want to be the last. Layla stopped recording, the silence heavy between them like a third presence. Without a word, she reached across the table and squeezed Jania's hand. A simple gesture that said more than 1,000 headlines. The return to the safe house was as careful as her exit, heart in her throat with every step. By the time her father's car pulled into the driveway an hour later, Jania was back on the porch, surrounded by her torn journal pages as if she'd never left, though something had shifted inside her. That evening, Layla's tweet went live. 2 minutes of unfiltered truth. Jania watched the view count climb, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, her words spreading like ripples in still water. No PR spin, no political agenda. Just her voice, finally heard on her own terms, cutting through the noise with quiet power. The slam of Jania's bedroom door echoed through the safe house as Elijah burst in, his normally composed demeanor cracking. His phone screen glowed with Jania's viral interview, her determined face frozen mid-sentence. The light cast harsh shadows across his weathered features, highlighting the worry lines that had deepened over the past week. "You went behind my back," he said, voice tight with controlled anger and underlying fear. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Jania sat at her desk, shoulders straight, chin lifted, a mirror of his own stubborn posture. Her homework lay abandoned beside her, replaced by scribbled notes about her interview. "I did what needed to be done, what you wouldn't do. This isn't about courage, Jania, this is about procedure, about keeping you safe." "Procedure?" Jania stood up, her voice rising. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "A man hit me in front of everyone. My so-called friends are calling me a liar. People are threatening to kill me. And you're talking about procedure?" Elijah stepped closer, his FBI director mask slipping. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You deliberately undermined security protocols. You left the safe house without protection. Do you know how many people want to hurt you right now?" "They're already hurting me." Jania's hands clenched into fists. Her knuckles turned white with tension. "Every time you choose your job over me, they win. Every time you hide behind rules instead of standing up for your daughter, they win. I am trying to protect you the right way." "No!" Tears spilled down Jania's cheeks as she finally broke. Her voice cracked with raw emotion. "You protect America. You protect justice. You protect your precious protocols, but you don't protect me. You never have." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Elijah's face went slack, as if physically struck. For a moment, he looked lost. Not the commanding FBI director, but a father realizing he'd failed his child. The truth hit harder than any bullet he'd ever faced. Without another word, he turned and walked out. The soft click of the door felt louder than any slam could have been. Jania's legs gave out and she collapsed onto her bed. Her chest heaved with silent sobs as she curled into herself, feeling both stronger and more alone than ever. The stuffed bear she'd had since childhood sat witness to her pain from the corner of her pillow. In the hallway, Elijah leaned against the wall, eyes squeezed shut. His hand pressed against his chest as if trying to hold something broken together. The sound of his daughter's crying filtered through the door, and for the first time in years, the great Elijah Brooks had no protocol to follow, no clear path forward. His training had never prepared him for this battlefield. The night settled into heavy silence. Jania wiped her eyes and reached for her journal, the leather cover worn from years of holding her thoughts. With trembling fingers, she wrote a single line. "This is not just my story. It's everyone's." The words stared back at her, a promise and a purpose taking root in her heart. The black government SUV rolled to a silent stop outside the safe house, its tinted windows reflecting the mid-morning sun. 2 federal agents emerged first, scanning the perimeter with practiced efficiency before opening the rear door. Dr. Camille Reed stepped out, her navy pantsuit crisp and professional, not a wrinkle in sight, carrying a leather portfolio tucked securely under her arm. Her calm demeanor contrasted with the gravity of her mission. Inside the living room, tension hung thick in the air, almost palpable like an invisible fog. Jania sat on the edge of the couch, her posture straight but uneasy, her fingers absently tracing the worn edges of her mother's bracelet, a ritual that always steadied her nerves. Elijah stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his immaculately pressed suit jacket, eyes constantly surveying the street outside. Dr. Reed settled into an armchair between them, her presence somehow both authoritative and gentle, creating a bridge in the space that separated father and daughter. "I want to be clear about why I'm here, Doctor," Reed began, her voice steady and measured, warm but professional. "This isn't about silencing anyone or forcing a quick resolution. This is about creating a safe space for truth. Your truth, Jania." Jania remained silent, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Dr. Reed's shoulder, her mind clearly processing thoughts she wasn't ready to share. The mediator didn't push, instead allowing the silence to settle naturally, understanding that sometimes quiet moments spoke volumes. "The Department of Justice understands the gravity of what occurred," Dr. Reed continued, opening her portfolio with deliberate movements. "We're proposing a closed-door mediation session with Judge Harrow. Neutral ground, no media, no recording devices. Just honest dialogue with proper protections in place for everyone involved, especially you." Elijah shifted, taking a protective step toward his daughter. "Jania, you don't have to—" "I'll speak for myself," Jania cut in, her voice quiet but firm, carrying the weight of her resolve. The room fell silent again, her assertion hanging in the air. Dr. Reed nodded approvingly, a small smile touching her lips. "That's exactly the kind of agency we want to preserve. This would be your space to speak your truth, Jania. Judge Harrow has agreed to listen without interruption or rebuttal." Jania's fingers stilled on her bracelet, gripping it momentarily. The mention of Harrow's name made her jaw tighten visibly, but she didn't flinch or look away. Minutes passed as she considered the proposal. Each second weighted with significance, the clock on the wall ticking loudly in the silence. Finally, she looked directly at Dr. Reed, her eyes clear and determined. "I have a condition," she said, her voice stronger now. "When I speak, I say everything. No one cuts me off. No one tells me to watch my tone or choose different words. Everything." "That's absolutely fair, Doctor," Reed replied without hesitation, making a careful note in her portfolio. "We can put that in writing as part of the ground rules. Your voice deserves to be heard completely." Elijah watched his daughter, pride and concern warring in his expression, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Every step of the way." Jania nodded slowly, her decision crystallizing like ice forming on water. "Tomorrow, then." Dr. Reed closed her portfolio and stood, smoothing her suit. "We'll arrange the session for 2 p.m. The agents will brief you on security protocols before we leave. Try to rest tonight if you can." After they departed, Jania retreated to her room, closing the door softly behind her. She pulled out an old shoebox from under her bed, dust dancing in the afternoon light as she carefully lifted the lid. Inside, beneath years of memories, movie ticket stubs, birthday cards, school awards, lay a photograph of her mother at a civil rights protest decades ago. Sharon Brooks stood tall among the crowd, sign held high above her head, her face alight with purpose and conviction, the same determination Jania now felt stirring in her own heart. Jania touched the image gently, her finger tracing her mother's smile, whispering, "I'll be ready, Mom. I promise." The federal building's glass exterior gleamed in the afternoon sun, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the old courthouse where everything began. Inside, the conference room was deliberately neutral, pale gray walls, a long mahogany table, and chairs arranged with precise symmetry. The air conditioning hummed quietly, creating a sterile atmosphere that matched the building's clinical feel. Even the paintings on the wall seemed chosen for their inoffensive, abstract patterns that neither calmed nor disturbed. Jania entered first, her steps measured and deliberate. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back neatly. Her mother's bracelet circled her wrist, a small touch of comfort amid the intimidating surroundings. Dr. Camille Reed walked beside her, portfolio tucked under one arm. The mediator's presence was both protective and professional as she guided Jania to her seat, giving her a reassuring nod as they settled in. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. The wall clock's hands moved with excruciating slowness. When Judge Harrow finally entered, his usual commanding presence seemed slightly diminished. His suit was perfectly pressed, his face freshly shaven, but there was an unfamiliar uncertainty in his movements. He took his seat across from Jania, maintaining what he clearly thought was a dignified expression, though his eyes darted briefly around the room before settling somewhere past Jania's shoulder. "Before we begin," Harrow started, his voice carrying that same authoritative tone he'd used in his courtroom, fingers adjusting his tie as if tightening armor. "Judge Harrow," Dr. Reed interrupted smoothly but firmly. "As we discussed, Ms. Brooks will speak first, without interruption." She placed her hand lightly on the table, a subtle barrier between the two parties. A muscle twitched in Harrow's jaw. He wasn't used to being silenced, but here, in this room, his gavel held no power. He leaned back slightly, a barely perceptible retreat. Jania took a deep breath and began speaking. Her voice was clear, steady, the same voice that had addressed the school board that fateful day. She described the moment in his courtroom in detail. The shock of his hand against her face, the stunned silence that followed, the way no one moved to help her. She touched her cheek briefly, the memory still fresh despite the weeks that had passed. "You thought hitting me would silence me," she said, her eyes never leaving his face. "But all it did was amplify my voice." Her words hung in the air between them, undeniable and powerful. Harrow shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming once on the table before he caught himself. He opened his mouth to speak, the habit of authority difficult to break. "Judge Harrow," Dr. Reed warned quietly. "Ms. Brooks has the floor." Her tone was professional, but left no room for negotiation. Jania continued, describing the aftermath, the threats, the isolation, the way her world had been turned upside down. She spoke about Rachel's betrayal, about watching counter-protesters call her a liar, about checking her phone each morning to see new messages hoping she'd disappear. She described nights spent staring at her ceiling, wondering if standing up had been worth the cost. Through it all, her voice never wavered. This wasn't the scared girl from the holding cell anymore. This was someone who had found her strength in the very moment meant to break her. Each word she spoke seemed to straighten her spine a little more. When she finished her initial statement, she folded her hands carefully on the table. The bracelet on her wrist caught the light. Looking directly into Harrow's eyes, she delivered her final words with quiet conviction. "You may have hit me, but I walked out stronger." Dr. Reed nodded, closing her portfolio with a soft snap. "We'll take a 15-minute break," she announced, standing to signal the pause. Harrow remained seated, his face unreadable but his shoulders noticeably tense. For the first time since that day in court, he looked genuinely shaken, not by force or threat, but by the calm, unwavering truth of a 15-year-old girl who refused to be silenced by his hand or his position. The federal conference room felt smaller now, more intimate, as Jania took her seat again after the break. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Judge Harrow's face. Dr. Reed's notepad lay open, her pen poised but still, waiting to capture whatever would unfold in this fragile space between truth and reconciliation. Jania's voice, when it came, was steady and clear. "Before that day in court, I spent years making myself smaller," she began. "I learned to speak softer, smile wider, just to make others comfortable." Her fingers traced invisible patterns on the conference table, a nervous habit she'd developed long ago. "Every morning, I check my clothes 3 times, my hair twice. Not because I want to, because I have to, because the world judges me differently." Harrow shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. A muscle twitched near his temple, but he remained silent as instructed, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall just above Jania's head. "When you hit me," Jania continued, her words measured and deliberate, "it wasn't just about that moment. It was about every time I had to swallow my words. Every time I watched my father leave for work, wondering if he'd come home. Every birthday card signed Love Dad that came 3 days late because duty called him away from me again. Her voice grew stronger, filling the room with an authority beyond her 15 years. I learned to code switch before I learned algebra. I can tell you exactly which words make white people nervous, which tone makes them feel safe. I shouldn't have to know that at 15. No child should carry that burden. Dr. Reed's pen moved silently across her pad, capturing Jania's words without interrupting their flow. The air-conditioning word, a constant undertone to Jania's truth, like the background noise to a life lived constantly on alert. You saw a mouthy black girl, but I was just existing, speaking, breathing. Jania's hands were steady now, no longer fidgeting. And when you hit me, you hit every girl who ever had to dim her light, every child who learned to fear instead of shine, every daughter who stands in her father's shadow, trying to be brave enough to cast her own. For the first time, a tear rolled down Harrow's cheek, catching the fluorescent light before dropping onto his starched collar. He made no move to wipe it away, as if accepting this small humiliation as his due. The worst part? Jania's voice softened, almost to a whisper. I wasn't even surprised. That's what hurts most. Black girls learn young to expect the hand that strikes us. We're told it's for our own good to teach us respect. She looked directly at Harrow, refusing to flinch from his gaze. But respect isn't taught with violence. It's earned with dignity, something you forgot that day in your courtroom. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence, heavy and demanding acknowledgement. Harrow's shoulders had lost their rigid set. His hands, folded on the table, trembled slightly, betraying the storm beneath his judicial composure. Jania stood, gathering her notebook and pen with deliberate calm. She didn't wait for a response or dismissal. She had said her piece, laid her truth bare. Dr. Reed rose and opened the door without a word, a silent ally in this moment of quiet power. In the hallway, Elijah waited, his tall frame straight but his eyes soft with a pride he couldn't contain. For a moment, Jania hesitated, the old distance between them suddenly vast. Then she walked straight into his embrace, letting his arms encircle her completely. For the first time since the slap, she felt truly safe, anchored by her father's strength and her own newfound voice. They stood there, father and daughter, as the afternoon light filtered through the building's windows, painting golden stripes across their joined shadows. No words were needed. Sometimes, healing begins in silence, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the courage to stand tall after being struck down. The digital clock on Jania's nightstand blinked 11 p.m. She lay in bed, still wearing her formal clothes from the mediation, too wired to change. Her navy blazer felt tight across her shoulders, and her dress shoes lay discarded on the floor. Her phone cast a blue glow across her face as she scrolled through Twitter. Jania Speaks was trending nationwide, with thousands of shares every minute. Maybe something good can come from all this, she whispered to herself, allowing a small smile to form. The comments seemed supportive, understanding. People were sharing their own stories of facing discrimination and finding their voice, stories that mirrored her own pain but offered glimpses of healing. Her phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. She tapped it without thinking, expecting another supportive headline. Instead, her blood ran cold, and her heart seemed to stop mid-beat. Breaking, hot mic catches Judge Harrow mocking teen victim after mediation. The audio clip started playing automatically. Harrow's familiar voice filled her room, dripping with contempt. She gave a performance. These kids know how to play the victim these days. She'll be on a book tour by Christmas. Laughter followed. Other voices she recognized from the mediation. Men in suits who had nodded sympathetically to her face. Her hands began to shake so badly she nearly dropped her phone. Within minutes, her social media feeds transformed. Previous supporters posted things like, "Was she just acting?" and "Maybe there's more to the story." Others questioned her motives, her character. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on her chest, crushing the air from her lungs. "All lies," she whispered, her voice cracking. It was all lies. She clutched at her mother's bracelet, seeking comfort that wouldn't come. Her father's heavy footsteps approached down the hallway. Elijah appeared in her doorway, his own phone in hand, his face a mix of anger and concern. Their eyes met. No words were needed. He crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. For once, he didn't launch into crisis management mode. He didn't call his team or start drafting statements. Instead, he simply wrapped an arm around her shoulders, warm and solid. Janiyah stiffened at first. Their physical affection had been so rare lately. But something in his silence felt different. This wasn't FBI Director Brooks trying to contain a situation. This wasn't the man who fixed problems with policy and procedure. This was just her dad, being there for his daughter. She leaned into him, letting out a shaky breath that seemed to carry weeks of tension. Her phone continued buzzing with notifications, but she ignored them. With trembling fingers, she opened her video gallery and found the recording of her meditation speech. The one where she'd been so honest, so vulnerable. The one Harrow had apparently mocked moments later. "He never changed," she whispered, deleting the video. Her father's arm tightened around her, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. The TV in the corner still played silently, showing clips of Harrow's smugly apologetic face from earlier that day. Elijah reached for the remote and turned it off, plunging the room into darkness, save for their phone's glow. They sat together in the quiet, father and daughter, as midnight approached. No strategies, no statements, just presence and understanding, finally bridging the gap between them. In the darkness, something broken began to heal. The morning sun cast long shadows across Atlanta's downtown as news anchors across every major network leaned into their cameras with breaking updates. The full audio of Judge Harrow's hot mic moment played on repeat, his dismissive chuckle becoming more damning with each replay. The words that had once been whispered behind closed doors now echoed through living rooms across America, impossible to ignore or explain away. "This is a deeply disturbing revelation," declared Senator Marion Walsh, who had defended Harrow just days earlier. "The judiciary must be held to the highest ethical standards." Her statement scrolled across the bottom of the screen as other political figures rushed to distance themselves from the disgraced judge. Phone lines at the Capitol buzzed with frantic calls as former allies scrambled to rewrite their connections to Harrow. Inside the safe house, Janiyah sat cross-legged on the living room couch, wrapped in her mother's old cardigan. The soft, worn fabric smelled faintly of the lavender perfume her mother had loved. She watched without expression as former colleagues of Harrow appeared on screen, one after another, expressing their shock and disappointment. The State Bar Association's announcement came through a stern-faced spokesperson. "Emergency disbarment proceedings have been initiated against Judge Thomas Harrow effective immediately." The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Elijah stood in the doorway, his phone buzzing constantly with updates. He watched his daughter's face carefully, noting how she didn't react to the news of Harrow's downfall. Her eyes remained fixed on the window, where morning light filtered through the blinds in thin strips across the carpet. The victory they'd fought for had arrived, but it brought no joy to her face. "The Georgia Justice Project has announced they'll be reviewing all of Judge Harrow's prior rulings involving minority defendants," a reporter announced from the courthouse steps. Behind her, protesters waved signs and cheered. Some held photos of Janiyah, turning her into a symbol she never asked to be. Her face appeared on handmade posters, her name chanted by strangers who knew nothing of the girl behind the headline. Through the courthouse's back entrance, security cameras caught Harrow's hasty exit. His usual commanding presence was gone, replaced by a hunched figure hurrying to a waiting car. His face was ashen, his hands trembling as he clutched his briefcase. Years of power and authority crumbled in a matter of hours. The man who had towered over so many defendants now seemed small, diminished by his own words. A secure email arrived on Elijah's phone with official confirmation. Judge Thomas Harrow's judicial authority has been suspended pending full investigation. He looked up to share the news but stopped short. Janiyah was still staring out the window, silent tears tracking down her cheeks, glistening in the strips of sunlight. "It's over," he said softly. Janiyah wiped her face with her sleeve. "Is it?" Her voice was quiet but steady. He showed who he really was, who they all, really are. She stood up slowly and walked to the window, her fingers trailing along the dusty sill. Outside, news vans lined the street. Reporters stood in clusters, gesturing animatedly as they delivered updates to their audiences. Signs bobbed up and down in the morning air. Jania's name was everywhere, but she didn't feel like celebrating. The justice she'd received felt hollow, a single battle won in a war that had been raging long before she was born. Without a word, she reached up and pulled the blinds closed, shutting out the circus below. The room fell into shadow. For the first time since that day in the courtroom, her shoulders relaxed slightly. She walked to her bedroom, lay down on top of the covers, and closed her eyes, exhaustion finally claiming her after days of running on adrenaline and fear. Elijah watched from the hallway as his daughter's breathing finally evened out into sleep. He silently pulled her door closed, letting her rest at last. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, this moment of peace was enough. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows, casting warm patterns across the breakfast table where Jania sat, absently stirring her oatmeal. Elijah moved with careful precision as he arranged a thick stack of papers beside her plate, each one bearing prestigious letterheads and urgent requests. "Oprah wants to do a primetime special," he said softly, sliding one letter forward. "CNN is offering a full hour, and—" He paused, holding up an official-looking envelope with the White House seal. "The First Lady would like to host you for a discussion on youth advocacy." Jania's spoon clinked against her bowl as she set it down. The weight of these opportunities pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her father watched her closely, his eyes gentle but concerned. "The world is ready to hear more," he added, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding tone. Instead, he spoke like the father she'd always needed, present, patient, understanding. Jania pushed the papers away, her movements deliberate and calm. "I'm not ready to give them more," she said quietly but firmly. Her fingers traced the edge of the table, finding comfort in its solid presence. "I don't want to be their next viral moment." The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Elijah didn't push or try to convince her. Instead, he gathered the papers and set them aside, far from her breakfast. "My English final is next week," Jania continued, her voice growing stronger. "And I haven't had a full night's sleep in days. She looked up at her father, vulnerability clear in her eyes. "I just want to feel normal again." Elijah pulled out a chair and sat beside her, close enough to show support, but giving her enough space to breathe. "You don't owe the world anything," he said, his words carrying the weight of someone who'd learned this lesson the hard way. "Just yourself." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jania's lips curved into a small smile. It wasn't big or bright, but it was real. Elijah smiled back, and together they sat in comfortable silence, sharing a breakfast that wasn't interrupted by phone calls or press requests. After finishing her oatmeal, Jania stood up and walked to the kitchen counter. She poured herself a cup of tea, adding honey the way her mother used to. The familiar routine felt like a small victory. With the steaming mug in hand, Jania made her way to the front porch, her fuzzy slippers shuffling against the wooden floors. She pushed open the screen door and stepped out into the morning air. The street was quiet now. The protest signs and news vans were gone. No more crowds chanting her name, no more cameras trying to catch her every move. Instead, she heard birds chirping in the maple tree across the yard, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves. Jania settled into the porch chair, wrapping both hands around her warm mug. The simple pleasure of this moment, just sitting, just breathing, felt like the first real peace she'd found since that day in the courtroom. Through the window, she could see her father clearing the breakfast dishes, giving her space while staying close enough if she needed him. The distance between them had changed, transformed into something new and healing. The morning sun continued to rise, and Jania listened to the birdsong, letting the familiar sounds of a normal Saturday morning wash over her. The morning sun filtered through the high windows of the Cold Springs courthouse, casting long shadows across the nearly empty chamber. Judge Thomas Harrow sat alone at a small table, his once pristine black robes replaced by a wrinkled gray suit that hung loose on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his silver hair stuck out in uncombed tufts. The 7 members of the Judicial Review Board looked down from their elevated bench, their faces stern and unreadable. The room felt cavernous without the usual bustle of attorneys and spectators. Only the soft whir of the air conditioning broke the heavy silence. Judge Thomas Harrow, the board chairwoman's voice cut through the quiet. You have been charged with conduct unbecoming of a judicial officer, abuse of power, and physical assault of a minor in your courtroom. Do you wish to make a statement in your defense? Harrow's shoulders slumped forward. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He shook his head once, barely moving. The deliberation took less than 30 minutes. The verdict was delivered without ceremony. Immediate disbarment, loss of pension, revocation of all judicial privileges. As the chairwoman read out the decision, Harrow's face remained blank, as if he were watching something happen to someone else. Across town, Jania Brooks sat cross-legged on her bed. Textbooks spread around her like a paper fortress. Classical music flowed through her earbuds. Bach's Cello Suite No. 1. 1, her mother's favorite piece. She highlighted a passage in her history textbook, mouthing the words silently as she studied. Her phone buzzed with news alerts, but she didn't check them. The world outside could wait. Her finals were next week, and she had missed enough school already. In the kitchen, Elijah Brooks watched the news coverage on low volume. He glanced occasionally toward Jania's room, relief washing over his face at the sound of her humming along to the music. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen. Breaking, Judge Harrow disbarred, effective immediately. Below it, smaller text announced the filing of multiple civil lawsuits from families whose children had faced Harrow in his courtroom over the years. Jania emerged from her room only once to get a glass of water. The TV caught her eye for a moment. She watched Harrow being escorted from the courthouse, head down, refusing to answer reporters' questions. Without a word, she reached for the remote and turned it off. You okay? Elijah asked softly. I have a chemistry test to study for, she replied, heading back to her room. As dusk settled over Cold Springs, Harrow packed a single weathered suitcase in his empty house. He moved mechanically, grabbing clothes without really looking at them. His law degree and judicial commendations remained on the walls, abandoned relics of a life that no longer existed. He carried the suitcase to his old Buick, the car he'd kept from his public defender days but never drove. The engine coughed to life on the second try. Without a backward glance at the house or the town, he pulled out of the driveway and headed for the highway. No one saw him leave. No one knew where he was going. In the end, Thomas Harrow disappeared from Cold Springs the same way he had wielded his power, quietly, leaving others to deal with the aftermath of his actions. Sunlight filtered through new lavender curtains, casting gentle shadows across Jania's bedroom walls. Gone were the stark white walls of before, now decorated with framed photos of civil rights leaders and her own artwork. Her desk held stacks of college brochures, law school pamphlets, and a journal filled with neat handwriting. The morning was quiet, peaceful. Birds chirped outside her window, and the smell of Elijah's attempt at pancakes wafted up from downstairs. He'd been trying, really trying, to be present more. Sometimes he burned breakfast, but he was there. Jania sat cross-legged on her bed, already dressed in comfortable jeans and a soft blue sweater, when she heard the mail slot click downstairs. Usually, she ignored it. These days, it was mostly fan letters and interview requests she didn't want. But something made her get up this time. Among the usual pile was a plain white envelope, no return address, just her name in careful, measured handwriting. Her heart skipped, recognizing something in those precise strokes. She carried it back upstairs, past the family photos newly hung in the hallway. Her hands were steady as she sat at her desk, but her chest felt tight. The envelope opened easily, revealing a single sheet of paper, crisp and white. The letter was short. Each word looked like it had been written with great care, perhaps even hesitation. You don't owe me forgiveness, but you changed me. I left Georgia. I'm working at a gas station in Selma. I don't deserve the robe. You do. T.H. Jania read it once, then again. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her heart remained calm. The words settled over her like gentle rain, not healing exactly, but washing something clean. She reached for her mother's old Bible, its leather cover worn soft with age. Inside, between pages marked with her mother's neat annotations, lay a pressed daisy from last spring. Carefully, she tucked the letter beneath it. Not to hide it, but to preserve it, like pressing a difficult memory between pages where it could rest without power. The Bible had been her mother's constant companion during her own civil rights work. Sharon Brooks had always said that change happened in small moments, in quiet admissions, in single steps forward. Now her daughter understood. A gentle knock came at her door. "Jania?" Elijah's voice was warm, concerned. "You okay?" "The pancakes are, well, they're edible this time." She smiled, touching the Bible's cover one last time before standing. "I'm ready," she called back, and she meant it in more ways than one. The morning light caught her mother's bracelet as she moved, sending tiny sparkles across the wall. Some things had changed forever, but others, the important ones, had finally come full circle. "Coming, Dad," she said, and opened the door to join him. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Hilton sparkled with elegant chandeliers and carefully arranged centerpieces of white roses and blue hydrangeas. Civil rights leaders, community activists, and survivors of injustice filled the round tables, their quiet conversations creating a gentle hum throughout the space. The stage was set with a simple podium, backed by a deep blue curtain with golden accents. Jania Brooks stood in the wings, touching the soft fabric of her mother's vintage silk scarf, a shade of cornflower blue that matched her knee-length dress perfectly. Her natural hair was styled in neat twists, adorned with small pearl clips that caught the light. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered her mother's words. Grace under fire. In the front row, Elijah Brooks sat straight-backed in his tailored suit, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The past 6 months had changed them both. Weekly dinners, long talks about her mother. He'd learned to listen more than speak, to hold space instead of offering solutions. The distance between them had slowly melted away, replaced by something new, something real. As Jania's name was announced, the room fell silent. Her heels clicked softly against the hardwood stage as she approached the podium. The lights felt warm on her skin, but she didn't flinch. She looked out at the sea of faces and found her father's eyes. He nodded slightly and she began. "6 months ago, the world watched me get hit," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But that's not why I'm here tonight. I'm here to talk about being seen. Really seen." The audience leaned forward, drawn in by the quiet power in her words. She spoke about the weight of silence, how it can crush you if you let it. About the difference between power over someone and power within yourself. Her words painted pictures of the women who came before her. Rosa Parks, who refused to move. Fannie Lou Hamer, who refused to be quiet. Her own mother, who taught her that dignity can't be taken, only given away. "They tried to make me small," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "They tried to write my story in their words, with their endings. But I held the pen. I chose what to say, what to feel, who to become." Tears glistened in Elijah's eyes as he watched his daughter, no longer a child trying to be perfect, but a young woman standing in her truth. She touched the scarf at her shoulders, a gesture that made him think of Sharon, and how proud she would be. "Healing," Jania said, her words ringing through the hushed room, "is louder than hate. It echoes further, lasts longer." She paused, looking directly at her father. "And I am my father's daughter." The silence that followed felt sacred. Then, as one, the audience rose to their feet. The applause thundered through the ballroom, but Jania's eyes stayed locked with her father's. In that moment, they both knew. They had found their way back to each other. If you enjoyed the story of Jania, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. If you enjoyed the story of Jania, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.